Hey, Peter, I got you.
Okay, good.
Why aren't you coming on there?
Is it Peter or Mick that's watching Murder, She Wrote?
It must be Mick.
Not Mick. I can't get him brought up here.
We're hearing you just fine through Mix.
Well, I can't bring up his picture. Why can't I do that?
Bottom left-hand side where it says start video, do you have that button?
Gotcha. Ah, there we go.
We're glad you're here.
See if they can hear you. Ask them if they can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
We got you, Mick.
Okay, thanks.
Remember your alt delete or whatever. It is the remote. Tell him you're sorry you missed that meeting that we had COVID.
What you meaning?
When you were sick.
Oh, yeah. Let me find him. Jordan, can you hear me? I missed that meeting. I was buried under my bed. I had COVID.
Oh man, I'm sorry that happened. You
I
doing
know, and I couldn't even get to the computer to try to tell you. I was a mess.
Yeah, I understand. I'm sorry that happened to you, bud.
Wasn't pretty.
Feeling better?
Unfortunately, or fortunately, or unfortunately, we didn't get around to having the meeting at all. So we're gonna have to reschedule it.
Okay.
So
I'm on the upswing now. I'm 2 days of being out of it.
glad to hear. Yeah.
Wifey, she's just about over it. It was crazy.
It is something else, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Did you guys see me freeze up a bunch during finance meeting? No, I switched over to my cell phone hotspot. I don't know why it's so bad, but I kept getting a banner that your internet connection is unstable. So
Although you didn't move a lot, so I don't know if you were frozen or just paying attention.
gotcha. Well, we'll find out since I have to do the invocation and pledge. We'll know here real quick.
You see Bonnie's peace sign?
I think we're just waiting on Deb.
What is it?
Peace sign.
What is it? Sign of what?
The old 70s.
Oh, is she a hippie?
Yeah, and I'm not seeing her yet, Zeb, sorry.
Tell her I'm sorry I missed my dog. I'm missing her.
Ronnie said she's sorry you missed your dog, her dog, Bonnie.
Your dog.
Your dog.
Yeah, I'm sorry you guys were sick. That's tough.
He gave it to me, Bonnie.
Of course.
Deb was at finance, right?
She was.
Okay.
Get your foot out of my ear.
Here comes Deb.
Okay, there we go. I think we got everybody now. Welcome, Deb. The Bellefontaine City Council is now in session. Please rise for the invocation and pledge of allegiance led by Councilwoman James.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together tonight. We ask for your wisdom in our decision making and that our decisions would bless those who live and work in Bellefontaine. In Jesus' name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Kurtz,
Here.
Mr. Lyle,
Here.
Mr. Reeser,
Here.
Mr. Springs,
Here.
Mrs. Baker,
Here.
Mr. DeSoma,
Here.
Mrs. James.
Here.
There are no members of council absent, so we'll move to the reading of the minutes. May I have a motion to suspend the reading of the minutes? Motion by Mr. Springs, seconded by Mrs. James.
Mr. Kurtz,
Yes.
Mr. Lyle,
Yes.
Mr. Reeser,
Yes.
Mr. Springs,
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. DeSoma,
Yes.
Mrs. James.
Yes.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? I do have one comment I want to make. I've noticed this before, Bonnie, when we are I think we list a lot of our department heads as absent. I don't know if that's necessarily correct. Maybe just say not present, because I think if we were in council and we could have everybody there, you know, all those, the police chief and the fire chief and the engineer, those guys would all be there if they could. So maybe we just list them as not present instead of absent in the future.
Okay.
We don't have to worry
Okay.
about it for the past minutes.
Okay, got it.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll move to administrative reports, Mayor's Office, Mayor Stoller.
Thank you. Good evening. And just to add to that, anytime that council or council president would like to have fire chief, for instance, police chief, or any of our department heads, I know they'd be glad to zoom in and give a report or answer any particular questions. And so in that case, you would probably say they were also present for the meeting, but I agree with Zeb. We don't even send them the Zoom link, so they can't be present unless we set that expectation. So that's a great comment. I'll tell you that I've now done, I'm looking over at my notes, I've done 6 state of the city addresses. Of course, I started with you folks, so I've been sharing our message of the challenges and opportunities of 2020. And while it's been a busy last 2 weeks, I always review my calendar to go over that with the city council. I don't have any particular notes to add this evening. So thanks for joining in and stay safe.
Any questions for the mayor? Mayor, just point of order here. Were we looking at appointing members to the, or we were going to do that at a different time? Was that the Tax Incentive Review Council?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we exchanged notes on that, and we should this evening. Gosh, Mr. Springs, you're on here. Thank you for saying yes. There were 2 at-large appointments, which also Rick Hatcher has served in the past. I also got his okay on that, so that would be 2. 1 then would come from you, Mr. Wagner, and the 3rd one is appointed by me, which is going to be Dave Henry. Has also, I put one arm behind his back, but he's also agreed to represent us. And for council, Ben Volrath brought to our attention that it's actually statutory of who makes up a tax incentive review. It's a Turk, is it not, David? And generally they meet once a year to review any tax incentives that have been issued and how they're keeping up on that. Additionally, and of course we keep her close to our heart, Barb South, who lost her husband, former Mayor Don South. Her term is just now expiring on Shade Tree. So I waited for a little time to pass. We had a great visit and she would love to continue on Shade Tree. So if I haven't given those to you too fast, Zeb, I would ask that we formalize that with a motion and a second so that the council can give its blessing to continue the good work of the tax incentive review, as well as another Shade Tree appointment.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I'm sorry I put you on the spot there. Let's first have a motion and a second to reappoint Barb South to the Shade Tree Commission.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Springs, seconded by Mrs. James.
Mr. Kurtz,
Yes.
Mr. Lyle,
Yes.
Mr. Reeser,
Yes.
Mr. Springs,
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. DeSoma,
Yes.
Mrs. James.
Yes.
Okay, and second, Mayor, point of order here, was Mr. Henry just your designee? We didn't need to appoint him, correct?
I believe that's correct. So whether or not the motion reflects Mr. Henry or not, that's my appointment. And then there are 2 at large, and that was Kyle Springs. Thank you, Kyle, and Rick Hatcher.
Okay, we'll do that all together, I suppose. A motion and a second to appoint Kyle Springs and Rick Hatcher to the at-large positions on the Taxes Incentive Review Council. I see a motion by Mrs. Baker, seconded by Mrs. James.
So moved.
Mr. Kurtz,
Yes.
Mr. Lyle,
Yes.
Mr. Reeser,
Yes.
Mr. Springs,
I'll abstain.
Abstention is noted, appropriate and approved.
Mrs. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. DeSoma,
Yes.
Mrs. James.
Yes.
Okay, and then I guess I don't think we need to, but I'm just going to do it for a formality to appoint David Henry as the mayor's designee to the Tax Incentive Review Council. Motion by Mrs. James, seconded by Mr. Reeser.
Mr. Kurtz,
Yes.
Mr. Lyle,
Yes.
Mr. Reeser,
Yes.
Mr. Springs,
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. DeSoma,
Yes.
Mrs. James.
Yes.
Okay, and with that, the council representative for the Tax Incentive Review Council will be the council president. I'll appoint myself. You guys are all doing a lot of work on everything else, so I'll get my hands a little dirty. And so with that, is there anything else for the mayor's office? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Service Safety Director, Mr. Henry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, members of council. I have a very short report tonight. I really would just like to start out at the last council meeting. I thanked our city team, and I'm going to do it again actually tonight because we had an even bigger storm. Some even called it a blizzard here about a week ago, I think it was, maybe a little bit more than that, but it was a multi-day storm. I would like to thank our citizens, our businesses, and everyone involved for their patience while we processed through that amount of snow. Not only was it the snow, but the freezing temperatures really kind of locks things in and makes it difficult to remove in some cases. Many of our other city departments are involved, of course, besides just our snow removal crews. We had many water main breaks that were addressed by our water department. Our fire and police, of course, continue to respond in all conditions, regardless of what's going on outside of the building. We had several snow plowers who joined in, including myself in a city dump truck, a smaller truck with a snow plow. Wes Dodds and Mr. Myers, who is on this Zoom, I believe, all jumped in trucks. Our snowplow guys are only allowed to have so many hours. So once they get to that limit, we look for other people who can help and assist. And there were others that did that. I just would like to say that we know, we don't necessarily do a perfect job in some people's opinion, but we're always doing our best. And I think that our city team responded to the best of their ability, and it's continuing on even now as we speak. We're going back and doing pushbacks of snow where we can and fixing items that were broken during the storm. So just a shout out to our city team. We did a really good job overall. And I just wanted to acknowledge their efforts. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, David. Mrs. Baker.
I was just going to mention on our way down here to, actually, we went to New Orleans first. Our worst roads were in Mississippi, where they didn't remove snow. And there were a lot of accidents because of snow in the fast lane that was big ruts. And I mean, you really see what getting the snow off makes a difference, because it was amazing when we're thinking, under every underpass, it was like going over a speed bump. So we didn't have that even when we left home, and we'd had a week of really cold weather. So you could really see the difference. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. That ends my report, Mr. President, unless there are questions.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Any other questions for Mr. Henry? I do have one comment, and I appreciate all the effort from all the city workers. I'm out and about walking around downtown all the time. I saw Wes plowing the lot where I park my car every day. But one of the things I think that is important for our city workers is to make sure that we allow them to do their job, to clear those roads or to have the access, sometimes by not having vehicles in the roadways sometimes. So with that, I know that some municipalities require that vehicles be removed in certain incidences where there are snow emergencies or different levels of snow emergencies, so those plows can get through and clear the road, so eventually cars can come back and park on the street and not obstruct traffic. So I'm going to refer that issue to the Rules Committee. I'd like the Rules Committee to take a look at that to see what our ordinances are for vehicles in snow emergencies, if there is anything. If there's something that we can do to ask folks to remove their vehicles for a short period of time in like a level 3 or a level 2, where we have massive amounts of snow that we need to get out of the way and out of the roadways to allow traffic to move or people to park so traffic can move. So Richard, I'll ask you and your committee to spend some time on that. We're probably late in the season for it, but maybe next year we'll have a plan in place in case we get another 10, 11 inches of snow in one event.
We'll take a look at it, Mr. President.
Thank you, Richard. With that, we'll move to Law Director, Mr. Stahl.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Kurtz, I would add that Chief Stanley and myself can be resources. I know the police department will be well versed in any regulations that we have currently on certain roadways that, no parking of 2 inches or more of snow types of signage. So we'd be glad to assist on that.
Thank you.
Sure. Right now, the legislation's been pretty quiet. I know Mr. Brentlinger's office has been very busy in finalizing the permanent appropriations, which we have up for first reading tonight. So I'm here to assist in additional legislation drafting. And so if any of the committees have requests, please let me know. I'd be glad to assist, but no other questions or report at this time.
Any questions for Mr. Stolle? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Stolle. Auditor's report, Mr. Brentlinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. As Mr. Stolle alluded to, we do have the permanent appropriations ordinance on for first reading tonight, and I will defer to Mrs. Baker and the Finance Committee for further details on that, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brentlinger. Any questions for Mr. Brentlinger? Seeing none, Chris, I always throw it to you. I know you're here because you have to be, but do you have anything from the Parks and Recreation?
You know, actually, I will make one comment. I just want to say to all of those out there, we have registrations open for baseball, softball, junior track. Those are our spring activities that we're getting registered for now. So anybody out there, go to our website, bellefontaineparks.com, and get your kids registered. We're excited to bring back baseball and softball and all those things that we didn't do at this time last year and try and find some more normalcy. So that's what we're looking forward to.
Mr. Mayor?
Point of order, Mr. President. Mr. Myers does not have to be here. He lovingly comes in and helps us manage YouTube and Facebook and our connections so that we can host this meeting and do it very effectively. So just a little add-on. Thank you, Chris, for coming in and being part of the meeting.
Part of the team. That's all.
Noted and appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Myers. Kyle, did you have something? I just had a quick question for Mr. Myers. I was curious if we were, what our plans were for the city pool this year.
Yes, I'm sorry, Kyle. I should have mentioned that. We are opening the city pool this year. That is our plan. That is what we're moving forward with. We have started hiring our senior leadership team, and then we're also currently taking applications for lifeguard and people to work front desk. So yes, we are moving forward, and thank you for asking that question. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Chris, I have a suggestion. Let's do realtors for a lifeguard for a day. Get Kyle and all the other realtors up there saving lives.
We don't swim, we just float.
My concern with that, Josh, is they're not allowed to have their cell phone with them, and all the realtors I know can't put them down. So
Dangerous.
Any other questions for Mr. Myers? Seeing none, thank you, Chris. We'll move to reports of standing committees. Finance Committee, Mrs. Baker.
Thank you. We have one ordinance for first reading this evening, and that is the permanent appropriations budget for 2021. The total general fund amount is $10,111,250. That is $19,640 less than our 2020 amount. And then the total appropriations are $28,438,881, which is $234,274 less than 2020, which is a 0.82% decrease. So we'll be asking for first reading only on that ordinance. And then we have an ordinance for second reading. We're going to ask that to waive the 3 reading rule on that one. And this is the rehab of the Bellefontaine Regional Airport construction project, and that is amounts to $2,286,499. This is the one that 95% is taken care of by FAA, and the city will, their share is 5%, which is $114,325. We will be asking for second and final on that one. And then we have one ordinance for adoption this evening, which is the ordinance that will clean up the wording for the prosecutor position, and we'll be asking for adoption on that one this evening. That ends my report, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Baker. I'm going to circle back to you here. I think there are 2 ordinances on for first reading tonight, at least on my agenda.
Yes, it is. And I forgot to mention that because I already marked it off for my mind. The court has asked us to remove ordinance 2107 from the agenda this evening. So if we can just pull that from the agenda, I don't know if you'll require a vote on that, but we're not going to have it read at all. It was kind of a last minute addition to the agenda, and when the court looked into the grant a little bit further, they realized that there were some problems with the software that they were looking at that they're trying to work through. So they're going to wait until they work through all those problems before they add that software. So we would just like to remove that from the agenda.
Okay. I don't think that I've had this come up before. Maybe I'll pick the brain of my successor to see, is there a motion that might be required for something like this, Mr. Henry?
I think just procedurally, just to be extra cautious, I think we could remove it, but it'd probably be okay to motion and second and vote to take it off.
What we'll do that now because there's only so many items on the agenda. No other committees have any ordinances on the agenda. So can I have a motion to remove ordinance number 2107B from the agenda? A motion made by Mrs. James. I need a second. Seconded by Mr. Springs. Can we have a voice vote on that, please? Roll call vote.
Mr. Kurtz,
Yes.
Mr. Lau,
Yes.
Mr. Reeser,
Yes.
Mr. Springs,
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. DeSoma,
Yes.
Mrs. James.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, we'll move to Rules Committee. Mr. Kurtz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report this evening.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kurtz. Safety Committee, Mr. Lau.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report.
Thank you, Mr. Lau. Utilities Committee, Mr. Springs.
Thank you. No report.
Thank you, Mr. Springs. Streets Committee, Mr. Reeser.
Thank you, Mr. President. We weren't able to have our streets committee last week, so we are going to have to reschedule, and I'll send out notifications about that when we get it scheduled. That ends my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeser. Sidewalks, Curbs, and Parks Committee, Mrs. James.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Audit Committee, Mr. DeSoma.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
That concludes our reports of standing committees. We'll now move to communications from citizens. The clerk informed me this morning that there were no communications from citizens submitted yesterday per our standing city council rule. We asked that any citizens that wish to participate in any council meeting submit their comments to the clerk in writing to the email address that's posted on the city council Facebook page. And those will need to be submitted by 6 p.m. the Sunday before the regularly scheduled council meeting. And they'll be reviewed by the president and read into the record upon receipt of the same. This week, for this meeting, there have been no citizen communications. So this will conclude the portion of our meeting for communications from citizens. We'll now move to ordinances for first reading.
An ordinance making permanent appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures during the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2021, and declaring an emergency in the city of Bellefontaine, Ohio.
Mrs. Baker.
Motion to pass on first reading only.
Seconded by Mr. Springs.
Mr. Kurtz,
Yes.
Mr. Lyle,
Yes.
Mr. Reeser,
Yes.
Mr. Springs,
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. DeSoma,
Yes.
Mrs. James.
Yes.
That concludes our ordinances for first reading. We'll now move to ordinances for second reading.
An ordinance authorizing the service safety director to seek proposals and/or advertise for bids and enter into contract with the selected contractor and/or bidders for the city of Bellefontaine to rehabilitate runway 725, project number 2021-03, and declaring an emergency in the city of Bellefontaine, Ohio.
Mrs. Baker.
Motion to waive the 3 reading rule.
Seconded by Mr. Springs.
Mr. Kurtz,
Yes.
Mr. Lau,
Yes.
Mr. Reeser,
Yes.
Mr. Springs,
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. DeSoma,
Yes.
Mrs. James.
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Motion to pass on second and final?
seconded by Mr. Springs.
Mr. Kurtz,
Yes.
Mr. Lyle,
Yes.
Mr. Reeser,
Yes.
Mr. Springs,
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. DeSoma,
Yes.
Mrs. James.
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Move to adopt?
seconded by Mr. Springs.
Mr. Kurtz,
Yes.
Mr. Lyle,
Yes.
Mr. Reeser,
Yes.
Mr. Springs,
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. DeSoma,
Yes.
Mrs. James.
Yes.
That concludes our ordinances for second reading. We'll now move to ordinances for third reading.
An ordinance amending ordinance 2083, authorizing and providing for compensation of certain department heads and supervisors, including the Bellefontaine Municipal Court Prosecutor, removing the prosecutor from said pay classification, confirming the full-time prosecutor position and pay, and declaring an emergency in the city of Bellefontaine, Ohio.
Mrs. Baker,
Move to adopt?
seconded by Mrs. James.
Mr. Kurtz,
Yes.
Mr. Lyle,
Yes.
Mr. Reeser,
Yes.
Mr. Springs,
Yes.
Mrs. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. DeSoma,
Yes.
Mrs. James.
Yes.
That concludes our legislative agenda this evening. We'll now move to communications from clerk. Are there any communications from the clerk?
None, thank you.
Okay. That concludes our communications from the clerk. Are there any communications from members of council? I just want to remind everybody, and the clerk sent us all an email that we have our Ethics Commission filing deadline, which is April 5th. April 5th, since we're all up for the primary. So make sure you guys have that on your calendars to get that submitted. Reminder, it's a pretty easy form, and you should be able to incorporate a lot of the information that you used the last time you filled it out. So just everybody make sure to put that on your calendar. Otherwise, you're going to owe the man more money than you need to. Any other items before council? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Oh, Mr. Solly?
Yes, Mr. President, you and I discussed this off script, but I look forward to seeing everybody back in person. And I think Mr. President is looking into identifying a location if it's not going to be the city building for us to meet. I know I've had a number of council people. Mick, I'm glad to see your guys are bouncing back that have had COVID. It's still a real concern, but it would be great if we could find a way to have council meetings in public and open invites to public to come participate, whether it be limited attendance or otherwise, just so we could, give the opportunity for our constituents to talk to us in person.
Thank you, Mr. Stolley. Anything else from anybody else? I'll entertain a motion and a second to adjourn.